Hello students, a very good afternoon. So today we will continue the topic from where we left in the last class from the chapter breathing and exchange of gases. So before we start the class, we have to take a quiz, okay? So here's your first question. Air is breathed through. So the options we have is trachea, lungs, larynx, pharynx and alveoli. Option B is nose, larynx, pharynx, bronchus, alveoli, bronchioles, nostrils, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli. And the final option is nose, mouth, and lungs. Okay. So you have a minute to answer this question. And please type your answers in the chat box. And even the YouTube students, it applies the same for you. Okay, so let's see. All right, students. So the question asked is the pathway of breathing. So what happens when we breathe? The air enters through nose, like through nostrils. Through nostrils, it goes through pharynx. From pharynx, it goes to larynx, right? The last pharynx is your laryngopharynx, right? It enters through it goes through the larynx and then it reaches trachea. From trachea, it goes to bronchi and bronchioles, and finally it reaches the alveoli. So the sequence correctly is given in option C. So we'll choose it as option C. Okay. So we have a second question here. Skin is an accessory organ of respiration in. So our options given are humans, frog, rabbit, and lizard. So again, you have 1 more minute to answer this question. You can answer now. Please type your answers in the chat box. Okay, students, we already have our answer, right? So let's see which is the correct answer. You might have out of 4 options, you might have chosen one answer. So let's see what is correct. So among all the examples given here, one of the amphibians is frog, and frog uses skin or cutaneous respiration whenever it swims underwater. So frog has an accessory organ of respiration as skin, because it respires both through lungs as well as skin. Okay. All right, students. So today our topic is we have to start from respiratory volumes and capacities. So what are respiratory volumes and capacities? So whenever we inspire or whenever we expire or do forced inspiration or forced expiration, or whenever we have to analyze out of 100% of the air that we have inhaled, how many percent of this air is actually participating in the respiration process? What is dead space? Okay. So these volumes will give us a very clear idea about how much of air is inhaled by a normal human being. If some of the people have respiratory disorders, it gives us a clear idea what is the problem in that particular person's respiration. Okay. So let us see some of the important respiratory volumes. So there are initially 4 important respiratory volumes. So the sum of on combination of these 4 respiratory volumes, we can derive the other respiratory volume. Okay. So let us see the first respiratory volume, that is called as tidal volume. So what is tidal volume? For example, for any individual, okay, take a person, whenever in your relaxed state, the amount of air you take in, inspire or expire, okay, without any force, this normal volume of air that is inspired or expired, okay, that is called as a tidal volume. Okay. So if you measure what is the volume of this tidal volume, it is approximately 500 ml. Okay. So now for a healthy man, so if a healthy man, how much he can inspire or expire? Approximately 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air he will respire every minute. So that is called as tidal volume. And the next volume is inspiratory reserve capacity, or it is also called as IRV. So the name suggests that it is inspiratory reserve, reserve capacity, right? So now what is inspiratory reserve capacity? See, already we have inspired. Now what we will do is we will do forced inspiration. Okay, we will try to inspire as much as possible by application of all the accessory muscles in our chest. Okay, chest area. So this is called as inspiratory reserve volume. Now, what would be the volume? This actually differs from one individual to other individual, but on an average, this is around 2,500 ml to 3,000 ml. Okay. So next volume is expiratory reserve volume. What is expiratory reserve volume? Now, after you expire, okay, you have exhaled the air. Now you do forceful exhalation. You want to put out as much air as possible outside. So this is called as expiratory reserve volume. Okay. So now, what is expiratory reserve volume average? So this average is around 1000 ml to 1100 ml. Did you get it? So next one is residual volume. What is residual volume? Now what I will do forceful expiration completely. For my knowledge, I have removed every air, okay, possible air that is there. So I have tried to remove it out. Okay. Now, is there any more air left in my lungs? Exactly. There has to be some amount of air present in the lungs at all the times. So this air that is present in the lungs, even after forcefully expiring all the air, that is called as residual volume. Okay. So on an average, an individual will have around 1100 ml to 1200 ml of air left in the lungs. Did you get it? Now, using this tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, and residual volume, so we can derive other volumes. Now we have to remember tidal volume, normal inspiration, normal expiration. What is a respiratory reserve volume? After normal inspiration, forced inspiration, how much more air we can add up? That is inspiratory reserve volume. Expiratory reserve volume is after expiration, how much more we can expire, how much volume of air we can forcefully expire. That is called as expiratory reserve volume. When it comes to residual volume, after forceful expiration, do we have any more air left in our lungs still? So that is called as residual volume. Understood? So let's see how we can derive the other volume. Okay. The first capacities that we can derive is inspiratory capacity. What is inspiratory capacity? Now, the total volume of air a person can inspire after normal expiration. After you normally expire, how much of air you can inhale? That is called as inspiratory capacity. So how do we derive inspiratory capacities? You just add tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume. So the sum of tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume will give you what? Inspiratory capacity. Same way is expiratory capacity. What is expiratory capacity? Is after normal inspiration. Once we have inhaled some air, how much of volume of air we can expire, okay, after normal inspiration. So this is called as expiratory capacity. How much is expiratory capacity? Now tidal volume, that is normal expiration plus forced expiration, that is expiratory reserve volume, correct? So TV plus ERV will give you expiratory reserve capacity. TV plus IRV will give you inspiratory reserve capacity. Okay. Next one, functional residual capacity. What is functional residual capacity? Now, after normal expiration, okay, there is some volume of air that remains in your lungs. After you have breathed out, some volume of air is still in your lungs. So this is called as expiratory reserve capacity. Now, how do we derive expiratory reserve capacity? Expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume. If you add these two, then we will get what? Functional residual capacity. Clear? Next one is vital capacity. What is vital capacity? Now, if a person has undergone forced expiration, after forced expiration, what is the maximum volume of air a person can breathe in? Okay. So that is called as forced expiration. Now, how do we derive forced expiration? Expiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume, and you add inspiratory reserve volume. So that will give rise to vital capacity. Did you understand? Yes. So now, what is total lung capacity? Now, total lung capacity is the total volume of air the lungs can accommodate, okay, at the end of forceful inspiration. So you have forcefully expired out. Now you keep on breathing in until you can take as much air as possible. That is called as total lung capacity. Now, what is the sum? What is the equation for total lung capacity? We add residual volume, expiratory reserve volume, tidal volume, and inspiratory reserve volume. So, if you add all these, you will get total lung capacity, or you can just add vital capacity and then you can add residual volume. So, vital capacity plus residual volume is also is equals to total lung capacity. Okay, is it clear? So this is about respiratory volumes and they are very, very important. Okay. So when it comes to breathing, so breathing can be of two types. One is the short breathing or shallow breathing. Other one is deep breathing. Shallow breathing can happen like when a person is running. Okay, like when you jog or when you're in cold water or whenever there is suffocation. So this can lead to shallow breathing. So this is also called as chest breathing, where you are just having a very little amount of intake of air into your lungs. Okay. Whereas the opposite type is called as diaphragm breathing, or it is also called as deep and soft breathing. So the deep and soft breathing is very high volume of intake of air will be there, and there will be expiration happening. Okay, and as well as inspiration happening at a very consciously higher level. Okay, for example, people who decide to sing, if they want to sing, they would definitely choose diaphragm breathing. Why? Because they will have higher breath as well as it is very, very soft and it is not short breaths. Okay, so these are the types of breathing. So let's see what is the. Okay, we have a question here. The total lung capacity is represented by. Okay, so you have four options, students. One is tidal volume plus vital capacity, tidal volume plus residual volume, vital capacity plus residual volume, inspiratory plus expiratory reserve volume. Okay, so you can answer this question now using your chat box. Students from YouTube, you can use the chat box to answer this question. Okay, can we solve this question? Yeah. What is total lung capacity? I told you total lung capacity has two formulas. So one of the formulas is if you add vital capacity, that is VC plus RV is equals to total lung capacity. Correct? No, I told you about here. You can come here. See, VC plus RV is equals to total lung capacity, or we can add other things. What is that? Residual volume plus expiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume will give you total lung capacity. So our option is 3. Option 3 is the right option. Okay, students. So let's see. Our next topic is exchange of gases. So how do exchange of gases takes place basically? So see, for exchange of gases to occur, obviously we are anatomically as well as physiologically very well evolved to do this process. But if you see some of the basic physics that is applied in the process of exchange of gases is basically depending upon a concept of partial pressure. So what is partial pressure? Now, for example, if I take a container and if I have a mixture of gases, let us say that I have atmospheric gases. Okay. Now I have 1 liter container and then I have atmospheric gases. Now you know that in atmospheric gas, the highest concentration is of nitrogen, correct? No? And then it goes to oxygen, and then you have lower and lower gases, correct? No? So now let us say carbon dioxide is also there. Now in atmospheric air, nitrogen concentration is very, very high. And next comes your oxygen, and next comes your carbon dioxide, correct? No? So there is a hierarchy of the concentration. Now, what is partial pressure is based on how many number of particles of that particular compound or an element is there, that will increase its partial pressure. Okay, for example, in this container, nitrogen's concentration is very high. That means nitrogen's partial pressure of nitrogen is very, very high. So if you compare between oxygen and carbon dioxide, because the concentration of oxygen is very, very high in the atmosphere, now the partial pressure of oxygen is also very, very high compared to that of carbon dioxide. Did you understand? So based on the partial pressure, okay, of these gases, now exchange of gases will take place between the tissues, okay, alveoli to the blood or blood to the tissues. Did you understand? Okay. In all the cases, whether it is oxygen or carbon dioxide, the process of movement of gases is through simple diffusion. Okay, simple diffusion. Now, where does the solubility or the exchange of gases will take place? So when you want the gases to exchange, first one is you should have a certain thickness to the membrane. So what membrane are we talking about? If you talk about your lungs, we talk about alveoli. Alveoli are the sites for gases exchange, correct? No. So alveoli are very well, integrated with blood capillaries like arteries and veins. Okay. So now the walls of the alveoli and the walls of these blood capillaries, they create a membrane, and this membrane is called as respiratory membrane. Okay, and the thickness of membrane is very, very important for to affect the rate of diffusion, like to at what rate the movement of gases is take place between alveoli to the blood or blood to the alveoli. Okay, so let's see what happens. See, when we talk about individual gases, right, that their concentration will result in the increase in partial pressure. So let us say, if you take an example of oxygen, so we inhale atmospheric air. So as we inhale atmospheric air in alveoli, the amount of concentration of oxygen is very, very high. Okay. So since the oxygen concentration is very, very high, now the partial pressure of oxygen on the walls of your alveoli is also high. So that is why from alveoli, it will move towards the blood and it will convert into oxygenated blood or red blood cells. Correct? No? See, the amount of blood oxygenated is 95. And amount of blood that is deoxygenated is only 40%. That means what? Since there was high partial pressure at the alveoli, now the blood got oxygenated. Correct? No. Similarly, as the blood moves towards the tissue, when the blood moves towards the tissue through, see what happens, the lungs, at the lungs, what happens, the red blood cells will pick up the oxygen. From there, it will go to the heart. From heart, it will go to the blood, body, on that is tissues. At the tissue, you have high amount of carbon dioxide concentration. Why there is a tissue high amount of carbon dioxide concentration? Because our tissues are undergoing catabolic reactions of breaking down of glucose. So when they undergo catabolic reactions, obviously their concentration of carbon dioxide is very, very high, and the concentration of oxygen is very, very low. So that is why now here from the blood, the oxygen will dissociate from the higher oxygen concentration to lower oxygen concentration, that is from blood to the tissues. Did you understand? And vice versa. You can see here in the atmospheric air, the concentration of carbon dioxide is very, very less. Correct? No? At alveoli, you can see that again in alveoli, it is very less. The amount of deoxygenated blood is 40, but in the process of oxygen, it is 45, and in the process of oxygenation, it's only 40. So what we can understand from here is either it is carbon dioxide or oxygen. Based on the concentration, it will apply, partial pressure. So when it applies partial pressure, the movement of gases takes place from higher partial pressure to lower partial pressure, as simple as that. So if you compare carbon dioxide and oxygen, see, carbon dioxide has very, very higher, okay, solubility compared to that of oxygen, right? So what does that define? See, the amount of carbon dioxide that diffuses through the diffusion membrane for every unit, right, is higher compared to that of oxygen. That means carbon dioxide will get diffused faster compared to that of oxygen. Did you understand? So how partial pressure contributes to the exchange of gases? Fine. Now, what is this respiratory membrane? As I told you, the surface of your alveoli and the blood capillaries, the walls of the blood capillaries, they integrate and form this diffusion boundary. And this diffusion boundary, we call it as respiratory membrane or just membrane. So if you see respiratory membrane, we can divide it into three anatomically important layers. What are those? These are nothing but the first layer is called as squamous epithelium of alveoli. Okay, the squamous epithelium layer, like this one cell layer of the alveoli. And next one is endothelium of alveolar capillaries. Okay, the endothelial layer of alveolar capillaries and the basement membrane. Okay, there is basement membrane between these two layers. So these three layers integrate to form this diffusion membrane or respiratory membrane. Understood? So if you combine all the three layers, the thickness is not even up to more than 1 millimeter. Okay, it's very less than 1 millimeter. Say that is what the thickness of the diffusion boundary, the partial pressure. Okay, all of them are very favorable for gaseous exchange. Along with this, you have temperature, pH. Okay, they will all influence the gaseous exchange. Fine. Let's go next. Let us talk about how the gases are transported. Now, when it comes to oxygen transport, see, basic gases that are transported across our body is oxygen and carbon dioxide. So we'll concentrate upon these two. Why oxygen? Oxygen is required for all the tissues for performing the process of respiration. Why carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide is very, very toxic to our body. It has to be removed periodically. So that is why the carbon dioxide is removed as a catabolic waste from the tissues and it is thrown out in the form of breathing. Okay. So when it comes to oxygen, so oxygen actually, the carrier of oxygen molecule 98% of the time is hemoglobin. Okay, hemoglobin actually, the reaction of oxygen with the hemoglobin is very reversible. So what is hemoglobin? Hemoglobin is a metalloprotein. It has an iron at the center, right? It has the iron at the center and it has 4 chains, correct? It is a quaternary protein and it has 4 chains, alpha alpha and beta beta chains, correct? So each hemoglobin, they can carry up to 4 molecules of oxygen. So now, whenever the hemoglobin, right, reacts with the oxygen, it will become oxyhemoglobin. Again, it will come back to normal hemoglobin. It will dissociate to hemoglobin and oxygen molecules. Understood? Now, what happens? How do oxygen molecules or how are oxygen molecules are carried by hemoglobin? So basically, it depends again on the partial pressure of the oxygen and some of the other factors like the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion concentration and temperatures are the factors that influence the hemoglobin to pick up as efficient oxygen as possible. Okay, so let us see what happens. If we try to plot a graph, okay, against, see at y-axis we will take percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen, how much of oxygen is carried by hemoglobin, that we will put in the y-axis. Next, partial pressure of oxygen. So how partial pressure of oxygen influences the activity of oxygen binding to hemoglobin. So that will result in a curve called a sigmoid curve. Okay. So once this association happens with hemoglobin, now it is assured that the oxygen is carried from the lungs to the tissues. Understood? Fine. So this curve, this sigmoid curve is popularly known as oxygen dissociation curve. So what does oxygen dissociation curve says? So initially, as the partial pressure keeps on increasing, at initial points, the oxygen dissociation or association with the hemoglobin is less. And after reaching a sufficient stage, now there is a rapid association of oxygen molecules with hemoglobin. And as the pressure keeps on rising, it will reach the point of saturation. So this curve is called as sigmoid curve or also oxygen dissociation curve. Okay, fine. So let us see what is happening with respect to oxygen transport. As I said, when it comes to alveoli, when we breathe the air freshly, so atmospheric air is very rich in oxygen. So since atmospheric air is very rich in oxygen, so the alveoli, the air that is intaken by us will be rich in oxygen. That leads to high partial pressure of oxygen. So since there is less amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that will lead to low partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Okay. And there is also less hydrogen ion concentration as well as lower temperature because the air is just inhaled. Now the lower temperature, low hydrogen ion concentration, high partial pressure and low carbon dioxide concentration will help in the formation of oxyhemoglobin. Did you understand? Okay. Next one. When it comes to tissues, where the partial pressure of oxygen is very low. In tissues, the level of oxygen is very, very low. But the level of carbon dioxide or the concentration of carbon dioxide in the tissues is high. So that will lead to higher partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Now, when there is carbon dioxide, that will lead to increase in hydrogen ion concentration. How? Now, we will talk about it. How the hydrogen ion concentration increases in the presence of higher carbon dioxide. Okay. Now, at the tissue levels, there is higher temperature. Now, when there is higher temperature, higher concentration of H plus ions, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and low partial pressure of oxygen, now the oxygen molecules will exit from the hemoglobin and it will dissolve. I mean, like it will dissolve in the blood and it will be absorbed by the tissues. Okay. Now you have to just simplify this. How oxygen became, how hemoglobin became oxyhemoglobin and how oxyhemoglobin became hemoglobin. So for factors that is responsible for the formation of oxyhemoglobin, we discussed here, correct? No, all these factors: low partial pressure of oxygen, low partial pressure of carbon dioxide, less hydrogen ion concentration, and low temperatures. Similarly, when we talk about the other thing, like what are the conditions responsible for dissociation of oxygen from oxyhemoglobin? Here are our criteria. What are those? Low partial pressure of oxygen, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, high hydrogen ion concentration, and high temperature are the necessary conditions for the oxygen to get come out from the hemoglobin molecule. Okay, fine. So we understood about how the oxygen molecule is transported. So let us talk about another important gas, that is transportation of carbon dioxide. See, carbon dioxide is very, very bad and it should not be there in our body. Why? Because it actually hinders with our neurological functions and it is also cytotoxic. So it should not be there on higher concentration in our tissues because it will kill our cells. Okay. So let's see what happens with respect to carbon dioxide concentration. We know that one of the vehicles of transportation of gases in our body is red blood cells. And the red blood cells have hemoglobin protein, which performs this function of movement of gases from one point to another. But if you see the role of hemoglobin in carrying carbon dioxide from point A to point B, that is from the tissues all the way till alveoli, only 20 to 25% of the carbon dioxide is carried by your hemoglobin molecule as your carboxyhemoglobin. So what about the rest of the carbon dioxide? The rest of the carbon dioxide that is present near the tissues are carried in bicarbonate form in majority of the See, there are three ways of transportation of carbon dioxide. So one, we know that it is by red blood cells in the form of carboxyhemoglobin, and the second one is in the form of bicarbonate. Okay, bicarbonate. And then we have the third form, that is through plasma, okay, as carbon dioxide itself. Okay, so we understood that only 20 to 25% of the carbon dioxide is carried by the hemoglobin as carboxyhemoglobin. Okay, so again, this binding of carboxyhemoglobin to carbon dioxide to hemoglobin is based on the partial pressure. Understood? So carbon dioxide have a kind of low affinity or low attraction towards the hemoglobin molecules compared to that of oxygen. Understood? Now, when it comes to bicarbonate, right? So bicarbonate is the highest form in which your red blood cells carry this carbon dioxide. I mean, like the blood carries this carbon dioxide. So what happens? Once the carbon dioxide exits the tissue, it will react with the water that is present in the blood plasma in presence of an enzyme called as carbonic anhydrase. So the carbonic anhydrase, okay, converts this carbon dioxide plus water into carbonic acid. So once it converts into carbonic acid, now again the carbonic anhydrase converts this carbonic acid into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. Now this is very, very essential. Why? Because the rise in bicarbonate and hydrogen ions actually they increase in the blood, and as the carbon dioxide rich blood is increasing, okay, or as the carbon dioxide levels are increasing in our blood, so the hydrogen ion concentration is picked up as a chemosensory function. For example, has something like a sensor which detects the hydrogen ion concentration, increase in hydrogen ion concentration in our blood. So our brain and the respiratory centers in our brain can pick up the rise in hydrogen ion concentration that will in turn tell our lungs to breathe out, okay, and put more and more oxygen into our blood so that the H plus ion concentration decreases. So that is what influences our rate of respiration. That is, see, when you run or when you exercise a lot, suddenly your rate of respiration increases. Why? As your tissues are performing more and more catabolism, more and more carbon dioxide increases. More carbon dioxide, more hydrogen concentration. When more hydrogen concentration is increasing, your brain is telling the lungs to breathe faster. All the muscles that are there to breathe faster and faster. Why breathe faster? To put more and more oxygen into our blood so that the hydrogen ion concentration decreases as fast as possible. Did you understand? So now what happens? We understood how carbon dioxide is converted into carbonic acid, and carbonic acid is converted into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. So now what happens, this bicarbonate and hydrogen ions, when they come near alveoli, there is critically low partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Now, because of the low partial pressure of carbon dioxide, that will lead to reverse reaction. That is, hydrogen and bicarbonate will combine to form carbonic acid, and carbonic acid will dissociate into carbon dioxide and water molecule. Did you understand? So now we understood that how the carbon dioxide is transported to red blood cell as well as through bicarbonate forms. Other one is plasma, where carbon dioxide is directly transported as carbon dioxide. Okay, so fine. So the next topic is very interesting, and this topic is about, okay, one second. Yeah, this topic is about how the respiration or how the neural system helps in regulating the respiration. Okay, it is quite elaborate, and it is so beautiful to imagine how nicely our body is integrated to perform these functions without putting us in a difficult position, right? If you were to think to breathe in or breathe out every time, you would have given up long back. But your body has designed so well based on the requirements of you, how much you exercise, whether you run or stand or sleep. So the rhythm of your respiration keeps on changing, or breathing keeps on changing. So for all this, some of the key regions in our body that monitors all this are called as respiratory centers. So this respiratory center is present in the medulla oblongata region of your brain or medulla region of your brain. And these are called as respiratory rhythm centers. So in medulla oblongata, you have two respiratory centers. Basically, they are called as dorsal respiratory group and ventral respiratory group. So each of them have their own functions to set the pace and rhythm of respiration. And another respiratory group is present in the pons region of your brain, and they are called as pontine respiratory group. And one of the pontine respiratory group is called as pneumotaxic respiratory group. Okay. So see, for example, if you take pneumotaxic respiratory group, what does it do? It will moderate the function of respiratory rhythm. How does it do? See, the pneumotaxic respiratory group actually cuts down the signal for the dorsal respiratory group. And dorsal respiratory group is responsible for actually, telling your muscles to contract. So when it cuts down the signal to the dorsal respiratory group, now the dorsal respiratory groups cannot signal anymore to your muscles. Now the muscles will relax. When the muscles will relax, your expiration will happen. So nice, no? Similarly, you have other groups. For example, some of the respiratory groups are responsible for conscious breathing, deep exhalation, okay, and rhythmic cycle of breathing, etc. See, when it comes to medulla regions, so medulla regions have chemosensitive areas, so that actually sense the hydrogen ion concentration in the blood. So whenever there is increased hydrogen ion concentration, which will lead to activation of the centers, okay, whenever these centers are activated, that will lead to adjustment in the respiratory process, where your breathing rate starts increasing more and more to remove more hydrogen, like carbon dioxide outside, and put more oxygen inside your blood. Okay. So some of the respiratory groups are also present in your heart, such as in aortic arch as well as carotid arteries. So here also there are chemosensitive tissues which can recognize the hydrogen ion concentration and send the necessary signals to your respiratory centers, and then it will trigger in creating the respiratory pace to remove the excess hydrogen ion. Okay, I mean like excess carbon dioxide. All right, students. So let us come to the final part of this disorders of respiratory system. So we have three examples for the respiratory disorders. So there are so many respiratory disorders that are caused on a regular basis for many individuals, because respiratory system is a very sensitive organ system. So it is highly prone to infections and highly prone to allergies as well as the injuries. So some of the most commonly seen respiratory disorders are, first one is asthma. Asthma is an inborn disorder, or it is developed later in the phase. It is mostly due to the allergic reactions. So basically the people from asthma have deep breathing difficulties. Okay, they have perfusion, breathing, where the respiratory rate is very, very high, which causes wheezing. And this is due to the inflammation or swelling in the bronchi and bronchioles that happens with them due to high allergic reactions. Next one is emphysema. Emphysema is a chronic disorder that is developed by the people who are too much into smoking or who are in the burning or smelting industries. So here what happens, because they have more carbon monoxide in their system because of excessive smoking of cigarettes. So they will have difficulty in inhalation or fixing the sufficient amount of oxygen into your body. So that is called as emphysema. Next one is occupational respiratory disorders. People who work in grinding industries such as marble factories, granite industries, or the people who are working in mines, coal mines or gold mines, etc. So they develop after a prolonged exposure to such antigens like dust particles. Our body gives up on this and completely do not fight against it or remove it. So this deposition will lead to the damage in lungs, okay, by causing inflammation. So this inflammation will lead to fibrosis or fibrous formation of tissues, which causes a serious lung damage. Usually it is referred as points. So in usually gold mines, whenever Britishers were making people work here, they would tell people that you have got enough points. Now you are not eligible to work. But people thought that the points were very prestigious. Okay. So it's quite sad to know the reality, but that's what they used to consider. So that will lead to pores in the lungs or points in the lungs. So that is why the protective masks and proper covering and proper gear is very required whenever there is a professional hazard due to the exposure to certain things. Okay, so we come to the end of this session today. Thank you very much, students. So I will meet you in the revision class and we will follow up all the topics in much more details. Okay, so we will end this session now. If you have any doubts, you can put it in the chat box. Thank you.